Good evening. I'm Gwen Lee, co-president with the Johnson County League of Women Voters. Welcome to Let's Talk Issues, a public service program co-sponsored by the Johnson County Community College, the Kansas City Star, and the League of Women Voters. Tonight's topic is deer policy in Shawnee Mission Park. Here to introduce tonight's panelist is Finn Bullers. Thank you for joining us, and now let's talk issues.
All right, thanks. Tonight we're going to be discussing a topic that's engendered a certain amount of passion here in Johnson County over the last year and even years beyond that. First at our panel today we have Ken Payne, who's the president of the Heartland Suburban Whitetail Deer Management. To his right is Gary Montag, the chairman of the Johnson County Park Board and former longtime Shawnee City manager. And to his right is Michael Metters, who's the director of the Johnson County Park and Recreation Department. We're going to have a roundtable discussion tonight that we hope will be engaging, robust, and maybe you might even learn a little bit. I'm Finn Bullers, and I'll be your moderator. We'll take you through some of the issues at hand. And I guess first off, why don't we talk a little bit about the role that each one of you gentlemen bring to the debate, introduce yourselves a little bit, and some of the issues that you'd like to get out on the table today. Ken, why don't you start us off?
My name is Ken Payne. I'm the president of Heartland Suburban Whitetail Management. We're an organization of bow hunters and conservationists that work with local landowners and businesses with deer damage issues. And we've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years now. So.
And you've been watching this issue closely, I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
Over the past year or so.
7 or 8 years.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. It's been about a couple months now. The board had voted back in, was it earlier this summer, and decided that there needed to be something done to respond to the severe overpopulation at the park. The board decided that they would recruit police officers to shoot the deer this fall with the goal to reduce the herds from about 200 deer per square mile to approximately 50. Do I have the numbers about right there? Right. Okay. And the idea being that there simply is probably anywhere from 8 times to 10 times as many deer as the land capacity can actually hold at the park. Now, we've had vocal demonstrators who spoke at the meeting of the park board that urged officials to find more non-lethal methods of thinning the herd. Quote, one demonstrator said, "We want to get the word out this impending cull is unnecessary, barbaric, and ineffective." That's certainly one point of view. Others would say that this is absolutely necessary, it is effective, and by far the most humane method by which we can control the numbers at a park that I have to tell you gets a lot of foot traffic. And we're talking roughly, what, 2 million visitors a year?
That's correct.
This thing is literally loved to death, isn't it? People have come to go out there and know that they can see the deer and have very fond memories. I know my family's gone out there and we've taken the minivan through, and both my daughter and my son have had a lot of enjoyment just simply looking at the deer. So we have to weigh a lot of different factors at work here. By the numbers, let's see if we can't quantify just sort of what we're looking at. We've got, how big is the park in acres, roughly?
Well, Shawnee Mission Park in general is 1,280 acres, two full sections. But when you add then Tomahawk Hills Golf Course, Oak Ridge, former Oak Ridge Stables, the Streamway Corridor, to the west, and even recent property we've acquired, it's about 2,230 acres, so 3.5 square miles.
And what does some of the wildlife guidelines suggest is a good capacity of deer on a size of land that size?
Well, it's difficult to ascertain. Some states will come out and actually tell you a healthy carrying capacity, and that's dependent upon the topography, the vegetation that is supported on that topography. But finally, when pushed, Kansas Wildlife and Parks did provide a number that said 20 to 40. And Missouri was in this part of the state, and Missouri was real close when they said approximately 24, say in western Jackson County or in the Kansas City metro area. So the board, as a part of the action that they took this summer, identified a target not to be driven by the carrying capacity, but also recognizing just what you stated, Finn, and is recognizing the enjoyment that many of the 2 million visitors that come to Shawnee Mission Park, in fact, come to view the beautiful wildlife there, including the deer. So the targeted goal is to reach 50 deer per square mile.
And I think that's an important point, because the people talking about the enjoyment watching the deer, that's not going to go away. There are still going to be deer in the park. There will be fewer deer at some point, but I mean, they're still going to have the opportunity to drive through the park, which many of us do in the evening, you know, to see the deer, and that won't change. The number, obviously, you won't see as many probably, but so the enjoyment is still going to be there.
Yeah,
There's a difference between a biological carrying capacity and a cultural carrying capacity, which is the land will support this amount of deer, which is the biological carrying capacity. What people will tolerate through car accidents or destroying vegetation, you know, expensive shrubbery, that's your cultural carrying capacity. Knowing that people come to the park to see deer as one of the reasons they come there, your cultural carrying capacity is going to be a little bit different. You know, I've heard anywhere from 20 to 35 deer per square mile is a healthy herd, and most of the places that we hunt outside of the urban area, suburban area, that's generally what you'll see, you know. So
what number is the cultural capacity versus a wildlife capacity? What are the different factors that go into that? I mean, is it going to be higher?
A lot of places the cultural carrying capacity is lower than the biological carrying capacity, because, you know, like I said, people will see deer coming in their yards and eating their $1,000 botanical shrubs and, you know, ornamental flowers, and, you know, they don't want that. But, you know, places like the park where wildlife is viewed more than just a nuisance, you know, it can be higher.
So how did we arrive at the 50 then? What was magic about that number that made that the target?
Well, I think as Ken has illustrated, the existing value that they bring to our park users. I also think it was established to be a safeguard, if you will, to ensure that a proper balance was still maintained. While Wildlife and Parks has repeated 2 spotlight surveys in November of '08 and November of '07 that reached the 200 deer per square mile that you mentioned earlier, the 8 times the normal carrying capacity, if you would, in the wild. We want to ensure that there is a safety margin in there, and so 50 was recommended to the board, and they concurred. That's not to say that down the road that we couldn't reevaluate. It's important to note that this is being done. You asked, what do we want to get out on the table? I hope that today's discussion, or this evening's discussion, gets out the conditions and the restrictions that impacted the decision that our board and the staff were faced in making. And while there's a lot of opinions, with 560,000 residents in Johnson County and 1.8 in the Kansas City, there may be that many different opinions on just how we should handle the deer. But when you go and talk to biologists and wildlife biologists who are trained in this area, many factors or issues had to be factored in there. But I hope that we have the opportunity to discuss that tonight.
Absolutely.
And we can share some of that information so that people, when they do make an opinion, they're doing it just not on the emotional feelings. And nobody's going to miss the deer more than those people that work there 300 days a year than those employees. But on the other hand, we want to ensure that there are deer there for future generations to enjoy that are healthy and vibrant.
As well as other species, other forms of wildlife and plant life, so they don't get
Because
destroyed.
isn't it fair to say when you had a committee that met for several months, I think 6 to 8 months or so,
Biodiversity.
the Biodiversity Committee, that was also a tenet of their work.
Absolutely.
That they were going to look at the entire ecosystem, not just the deer.
We were very strategic, and in fact, our sponsor, the Kansas City Star, who came out and supported what ended up being the measure we took, actually got after us a little bit that it was taking so long. And we took a little bit more time to ensure that we were doing it correctly, that we had gathered all the available information that we possibly could, but that we didn't rush to judgment. And so it included some public hearings that literally hundreds of individuals had the opportunity to come and express their opinion. But in that, and during the time in which the Biodiversity Committee did meet, Finn, they did take into consideration, just as the comments Ken has made, not only the health of our herd, but what about the health of our complete diverse ecosystem there, the flora and the fauna. The browse line, that's that bottom 5 feet that you can go throughout the entire park, and it looks like somebody's gone through there and just trimmed all vegetation.
And essentially that's where the deer could reach
Absolutely.
to browse and eat.
And that's their favorite diet. If you see them browsing, we were talking earlier, they're not eating grass. They may be eating the thick broadleaf dandelions or clover. But their best nutrient, which now is void because the trees no longer are growing that, now have changed the understory of our wooded areas so that songbirds and small mammals that normally would habitat that area are no longer there.
The term understory, it's at the bedding material and the areas by which they might nest.
Right.
Correct.
All the little plants, all the little
and-
shrubs. Yeah.
Also, in December 2008, the Star had an editorial in which they suggested that the district put on a hunt at an early date, and we didn't right away, of course. We looked at all these other alternatives. We looked at the possibility of sterilization and relocation and many of these things, and through our public hearings, we had 2 public hearings which were very well attended, received tremendous input, and we looked into all these different alternatives. And
you saw dollar signs.
well, actually, even the dollar signs were a factor, but even they weren't viable even at a high cost, because we
right?
were allowed to do these things because
Well, let's talk about one, for example, on relocation. Not only is it fairly costly from what I understand, the state of Kansas won't allow it.
they won't allow it, and even the Humane Society, does not support relocation, because of the problems associated with
80% of the animals transported and relocated die
Is that
from
right?
stress.
well,
So
Up to 80%, and I think
Is
it's
that right?
important to say 20 to 80%. That 80%, though, was reported just not too far from here in St. Louis County.
Right.
And so the National Humane Society, who we contacted early on, and we asked their opinion, what are some of your recommendations for non-lethal means? And they came out, as Gary said, and opposed the relocation for the reasons just mentioned.
but that was a very popular suggestion at our public hearing, relocation, because it seems to the public, this is a painless way, and relocate the deer, and everyone's happy. But it just simply didn't work out, at least at this point.
give them to someone else.
Yes, give them to someone else. But
Another idea that people float out there is sterilization. What do we have there?
Well, it's an expense of $600 to $1,000 per animal.
Per animal.
It is costly. Deer, as we all recognize and know, are a nervous, flighty animal. Recovery is oftentimes stressful, painful, can be terminal, and so that is of great concern. but it also doesn't allow the expedient reduction, and that's where we are. Without exception, even the Humane Society recognizes that number of 200 per square mile, and I've said it before, you've heard me say it, if we don't do something, Mother Nature will. And what she'll do won't be as humane as what I believe we can do with trained marksmen and certified archers.
Meaning that perhaps disease, if the overpopulation is used to
and disease.
But the chemical sterilization, which is one thing that has been looked at, only reduces the herd by 11% a year. So it would take 10 years to even reduce the herd to what we're trying to achieve in a short period of time.
As well, even in pinned animals, it's ineffective.
And not only that, another thing, it's not allowed. There's no approved sterilization contraceptive in Kansas at this point.
Really?
And so that's been approved by the Nation Game. So
where it's been used,
there.
has it been approved with other jurisdictions?
It has been done in other jurisdictions, but again, it's like 11% of reduction, so it's a very slow process. And so that's chemical now. Then there's physical sterilization, which is a little bit more complicated, but that's the one that's very expensive, of course, and it's very time-consuming and is not easily accomplished.
Finn, when the board took action, they addressed the immediacy, but they also directed staff to explore and evaluate other non-lethal means to stabilize. And so it will be through our efforts, the staff and higher education, Kansas State University Wildlife and Parks, to evaluate. Hopefully there'll be some research assistance to evaluate. There aren't many communities, but there are other communities that have deer population as large as what we have in Shawnee Mission. Let me say that again. There aren't many, but there are others, some that even have higher concentration than we do.
Because
many folks said it was the highest in the United States.
Right.
You might have been one of them. You need not go far, again, to Town and Country over in St. Louis.
Right.
And the problem we have here in Johnson County isn't a Johnson County problem. It isn't a Kansas City problem. It's an eastern United States, and everywhere that the whitetail deer thrive, they're like the coyote or the red fox of 20, 30 years ago. They are becoming more and more adaptable to living here with humans. Sometimes at the safety of our families, driving the interstates, driving the roads through our own parks, and that too had to be weighed by the district board.
Well, then when people, and there are people that will want to point a finger of blame, they'll want to look around and say, well, it was because of this reason or that reason. I mean, is it a function of development? I mean, if anything, is it, another, dare I say it, suburban sprawl issue that...
That's an interesting point because, when I came to Shawnee 35 years ago, we didn't have a deer problem.
Yeah.
The deer weren't there. And it's just been fairly recent, within the last 20 years, I'd say, where we started to see, this large number of deer. And so it hasn't been suburban development necessarily that's created the problem. There are a lot of deer outside the urban areas, and that's what they're being controlled, by hunters or by the landowners or whatever, but it's in that one in the urban area. And this, of course, Shawnee Mission Park is the largest green area in Johnson County,
pristine
in the
land
urban area.
Yeah.
And it's completely safe for the deer, so they thrive there.
No predation.
But again, it's not something that's been there for many, many years. I mean, it's a fairly recent thing.
The only predators seem to be the automobiles.
Cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a term. And under those conditions, I suppose it's natural that a population does grow, and we've seen it all across the country, elsewhere. So help me understand then, where do we sit now? The board, of course, has given its blessing. What kind of money do you have to work with, and how soon might the fall culling begin?
Well, between October 1st and December 1st, the initial sharpshooter harvest will take place. As you mentioned earlier, that will take place by certified law enforcement officers from our agency and others that will go through extensive training and even psychological review. As you can imagine, I'm sure it's a stressful ordeal to harvest the deer. So it has to be a special individual that will take on those responsibilities. at the conclusion of that, and let me step back. Prior to the initial harvest, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks will again come in. They'll do a spotlight survey sometime by the end of this month or in early October to ensure again that our target numbers are appropriate. Immediately after that harvest, they will come in and do a spotlight survey again, so early part of December. At that time, that information will be provided to our board, and a decision will be made with Wildlife and Parks and our board based on that target goal of 50 deer per square mile. And at that time, any archers who have pre-qualified not only possess a Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks deer permit, but also a district testing fee, which grants them access, and then a proficiency test. And I think this is really important because I think while many, and I don't want to label anybody, animal rights or any of the others, but people that are very concerned about the well-being of the deer and the humane nature in which we'll go about doing this, many are making their decisions based on old, outdated information, and Ken can address this better than I, but even 20 to 30-year-old studies about the accuracy of what I will call the old longbow. Today the compound bows are much more accurate, but these pre-certified archers will then have the opportunity in a highly controlled setting where public safety is of the utmost importance. In fact, both those harvests will be critical and incumbent upon our staff to ensure the public safety while these hunts go on. But they will take place at district designated stands at district designated times and hours of the day.
So the district will all identify the stands and the times.
Yes.
And the overall policy. The bow hunter or the amateur will go in. Will there be judgment given to the bow hunter as to what is a clean kill, what isn't, and how they are to approach, the shoot up, shoot down, all of those type of
That'll all be a part of their certification and training, including deer stand safety. But yes, proficiency not only once the test is concluded, but also throughout their harvest will be ensured. And this is maybe something that where Ken and his folks in the district may not agree. The Wildlife and Parks current urban deer management method is bow hunting, and this can hardly be likened to bow hunting. Yes, the skills are the same, but they are advanced. Not all of Ken's folks will probably have the opportunity initially. We hope that they'll train and stay with it and get that certification, but to initially be included in this harvest because we want to ensure that accuracy. But I don't want to be a misnomer or adding to that misinformation out there. I know and I also recognize that the accuracy because of these compound bows has increased tremendously since these original studies, and even information that the Humane Society and others continue to use.
Ken, what are your thoughts there? Does this sound like a reasonable course of action, or is...
Oh, I definitely agree with the proficiency test and making sure that the bow hunters are certified, tested. My group, everyone in my group has to have bow hunter education as a requirement. We shoot our yearly proficiency test, which is 5 out of 5 arrows with broadheads at a 5-inch circle at 20 yards. If you can't do that, in my opinion, you don't need to be hunting in settings like this. I'm not sure what the park's proficiency test is going to be, but we're all dedicated. Like he said, not everybody's going to be able to pass the test. Not everybody can qualify to be in our group. So, everybody knows that.
But you're certainly up to the understanding that there are very specific ways that and proficiency levels that they want to meet. That if your guys can do it and cut it, great. If not, we go back and practice and come back another day.
Yep. I mean, there's a lot of people that I've talked to that aren't even interested in the hunt because it's antlerless only.
I see.
The guys that form our group, we're conservationists. I mean, herd management is part of the entire picture. I mean, we don't all want to just kill a trophy buck, you know.
Well, there is that stereotype out there. For
Oh yeah,
people.
definitely. I mean, if you watch the Outdoor Channel or whatever, I mean, that's all you see is very seldom. They didn't used to show a lot of herd management. Now they're starting to more and more. Hopefully for that very reason, you know, we need.
But I'm curious, what motivated you originally to take up the sport, and where do you fall on the spectrum of, as far as, you know, deer management versus, you know, purely sportsman?
I grew up in the country. I've been around hunting all my life. To me, bow hunting's more of a challenge, you know, than hunting with a rifle. So that's why I choose to use archery equipment. I believe firmly that hunters are the reason that we have viable populations of game animals in the United States, because if it weren't for hunters, sportsmen like Teddy Roosevelt and Aldo Leopold, we wouldn't have hunting seasons, we wouldn't have bag limits, and we wouldn't have huntable populations of anything. Market hunting nearly wiped out all game species in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and if it wasn't for early sportsmen, we wouldn't have it. So I mean, I firmly believe we have to control the populations. We owe it to the wildlife, to future generations of hunters and just wildlife lovers, you know, that like to watch animals. So.
Well, on that, I think both of you agree. I mean, you certainly, I know, Mike, you've said in the past, got into wildlife and parks and the beauty of the outdoors and the serenity of letting Mother Nature do what she does best. Coming up then, we've got the deer season soon upon us. What's the timeline for when you trot out the program, and where are we at this stage? When might we actually see the sharpshooters in the parks?
Well, and maybe I didn't make that clear earlier. I apologize. After an initial spotlight survey by KDWP later this month, early October, between October and December 1st, the sharpshooters will come in and cull the herd initially, then followed by another spotlight survey, and then at that time, with the assistance of Wildlife and Parks and the predetermined target goal of 50 deer per square mile, we'll make a decision then that the secondary harvest of these certified archers will take place. That would take place in December and possibly January. At the conclusion of either the first or the combined, if it's required, harvest, again with Wildlife and Parks, now we will conduct a census. And I want to differentiate. The spotlight survey is a very accurate but still estimation based on that method. But when winter comes and there's good snow cover on the ground, then an aerial flyover, and you can actually physically count the individual deer. And that will help support the documentation. It will help Wildlife and Parks make a determination on what continued practices they want to ensure on this herd reduction permit, which is what they are issuing to the district. And we'll work in concert with our citizen committee, the biodiversity committee that you mentioned earlier. We'll have working committees on nuisance animals, on invasive species, prairie restoration, our forest, water and riparian corridors.
And the board, I want to make this point very clear, the board has asked the staff to continue to look at non-lethal means, you know, of controlling the herd. So we're not just looking at the hunting aspect of it, and we think that's going to eventually be available to us at some point. So
at some point, there might be a way to integrate some
there
of
might
this
be
stuff.
sterilization, or you know.
How might you envision that happening? I mean, once they get to a certain level, by which then it's a better technique to.
Well, once the state of Kansas, you know, says that there is an approved method, that we can pursue that method. Right now, we just don't have that available to us. But you know, they're aware certainly of our concern and our interest, and they do control. You know, they own all the animals in the state of Kansas. All the wild animals in Kansas are controlled by Fish and Game. So
you could imagine a time down the road where you might opt for some of these other methods. Are there any in mind that you have?
I believe so. I believe that we'll actually see that at some point.
Give me an example. Like what might we see?
I would think some type of sterilization. Some type of chemical sterilization would be, I think, the preferred method.
And how would that work? Would you then get the herds down to a certain stable size by which then over a course of a few years you could work toward sterilization?
Right, so you maintain a constant size.
Yeah.
Right.
And would the money be there to do that? I mean, I know it's an expensive prospect.
Well, at this point, I don't think it's that expensive.
Okay.
It depends. Physical sterilization is pretty expensive. Chemical sterilization probably is not as expensive. Once they have a method that's perfected, that I think it's feasible.
Right.
To do that, because the hunting, any method we use is expensive. There's a cost involved. So
you do hit on an important point, and as you well aware, Finn, a number of years ago, MAP 2020, which primarily was talking about the future development of our parks and expansion of the inventory, identified a permanent funding source. At the time, it was a 1/10 of a cent sales tax, which would afford us the opportunity not only to acquire and develop new parks and recreation facilities, but really also to maintain them at the level that is commensurate with the number of acres. Right now we have 9,000 acres. We only have about 5,000 of them developed. So there is a large number of park acreage that what's occurring now at Shawnee Mission Park may in fact someday happen at some of these large expanse regional parks that we have. And so with proper funding, a staff biologist that could intervene sooner, and we're not talking about deer exclusively. You can go in at any compound, water compound or impoundment, body of water in Johnson County, and there's too many geese. And we've retrained those geese by feeding them crackers and bread and printed now on them, and they're a nuisance. They're a problem.
They don't leave.
And and muskrat, beaver, turkeys
are getting bad too.
So we have to intervene where in our expanse and in our development we've eliminated the predators and Mother Nature's natural life cycle here, and so in doing so we need to replicate that as best we can.
Well, it makes the sales tax initiative in Missouri look pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, they
are well funded.
I know sunset built-in funding stream, and they do, I guess, regularly in most parks controlled hunts.
There's three parks in the Kansas City area that have controlled hunts every year. Right in town in Jackson County, Tiffany Springs, Riverfront Park, and I can't remember, Longview, I believe is another one.
Seems to be fairly effective from what I've seen.
Very effective, yeah, very effective. And they have hunts in several other parks that are not necessarily in core suburban areas, but on the outskirts. Well, Blue Springs, I think Lake Jacomo out there, they have one too. They've been doing it for 12 years or better, 15 years.
Do you envision a time when we might
issues.
do that in Johnson County?
That will be something that the board will have to evaluate again with Wildlife and Parks. Longview Lake, Longview Park and Lake, which is bigger than Shawnee Mission Park, last year had a very successful deer harvest. They had 38 deer taken by bow. Now, if that's a larger park and we're worried about the number of deer that are going to be required to maintain that population, and yet they look at that as a healthy, successful harvest, then I think folks need to recognize that we're going to reduce them as best we can to catch up where we should be, but there will be a method to maintain it. If contraceptives and sterilization can't be the answer to maintain, and we know in fact that more deer will migrate to this 2,000-acre safe haven, with 18 miles of Mill Creek linear streamway corridor from Olathe clear to the Kansas River, where are they going to go?
Whitetails don't migrate.
They
have a core area that they stay in their entire life.
But they will come into safe haven
people
if it's adjacent.
At the public meetings were saying build these
corridors,
greenways, so they'll migrate.
Anyway,
they don't migrate. They're not caribou. They're not elk.
And I didn't mean that in large herds that they'll go from one end to the other, but they will seek safe haven. And so if they're migrating into the park, as I would
what I've
try
read
to
is
say.
even if they're starving to death, they will not leave their core area. They will stay there and they will suffer and die there. That's one of the reasons that this whole deal with the park is, has to be done. As far as talking about funding for the contraceptives, the whole bow hunting issue would be self-funding. It could pay for itself. It would be a standalone program. If you guys were to hire a biologist and some of your park police, have a couple of people that just managed the hunt that time of the year, we would definitely be willing to assist with that. And like I've said before, there's no charge for our services.
Well, and is there a way that hunters are always looking for a new opportunity to fly their sport, by which it could be a revenue producing point for the county, by which the program helps fund itself?
Fund itself, yeah, that's what
over
I'm
the
saying.
time?
That's what I'm saying.
Actually, you have to be careful. In Kansas, there is some immunities to landowners that avail themselves, their property, to public hunting. When you start charging a fee, your immunities, the statutes.
That's for access, though.
Well,
for the permit, there's Kansas statutes that state if I don't pay you to hunt your land, you are not liable. But once money starts changing hands,
right,
for access,
that is correct,
then you can be held liable. But if you go like with what the state of Missouri does, you buy an extra permit, the Wildlife and Parks needs to be involved with maybe helping manage that hunt, just like they are in Missouri. You have to buy a permit that's good for 2 does. I think you have to tag one of your does, bring it into the check station before you can fill your buck tag or your other doe tag. So, you pay an extra, I think residents pay an extra $15 to $25 for the permit to hunt Lake Jacomo, say. It's going to pay for itself. And you're not going to get a lot of bow hunters in there to just hunt does. There's going to have to be some kind of incentive. Honestly.
What about ongoing funding stream for this? Is there any chance or outside hope that either the county commission or parish that thought the state might come up with any revenue? Doesn't seem to be too likely, does it? I mean, where might we find some money to make this happen?
During our public hearings, we had the members of the public offer, to fund, some non-lethal means of dealing with this problem. And of course, we didn't set that up at the time, but that's a possibility in the future that people, would, fund a way of taking care of the thing that's acceptable to a large number of people. But no, as far as seeing additional revenue from the state, I think that's unlikely. And right now, and local government is struggling, I think, and every local government is struggling. But we still have our budget. We still have some funds, and we'll continue to have some. So.
And have you allotted a certain amount? I saw the figure of 50 grand thrown around somewhere. Is that roughly the money that we're looking at?
Oh, not for this
No?
entire program. That $50,000 was allotted for invasive species and nuisance animals, invasive and nuisance animals. Mm-hmm. Whether it's Cerisa lespedeza, the fern-looking plant, honeysuckle, again, that is taking over the understory that we talked about. In fact, on that point, it's because there now is sunlight getting in, not shade, that is permitting that we're getting many of these invasive species coming in. And again, it's a result of the deer themselves. But that funding was intended to address all of those issues collectively. So rest assured we'll have to come up with the resources within our existing operation. Mm-hmm. And failure to do so will only magnify the problem in future years. So
do more with less, right? We hear that all the time.
We've been rewarded for doing just that for many years.
The question when I keep getting asked when this subject comes up is people want to know they seem to get the idea that this has been an issue for some time. I mean, this didn't come up just within the last year or so. And I think some of the park people have talked about, over the course of several years, the deer overpopulation has grown larger. And people ask why the district didn't move quicker, sooner, to head off some of this stuff. Can you address that issue and talk a little bit about maybe what had been done prior and how we've gotten to a point where it's now at, 8 times as large as the population as it should be?
Well, I think there's many factors, and we've hit on a few. Certainly, urban sprawl or the development around Shawnee Mission Park has encapsulated that park, if you will. The safe haven that we've talked about before. But it's an oasis where they have done quite well, again, with no predators. We have been aware, but I will tell you, and I've been at that location, as you know, been with the district nearly 24 years, but only the last 8.5 out there. I can tell you that while the browse line was becoming evident 8 years ago, it was only in the last 3 to 4 years that it was evident in the entire park proper, meaning we're seeing that not replicated just in the park but on the streamway corridors. The deer population, while it may have been over, again, that carrying capacity, the biological carrying capacity for some time, the last 3 to 4 years, 5 years in particular, it has just expanded. The number of twins and triplets that we're seeing deer have is incredible. And so 3 years ago, this past January, the district did begin thorough investigation. And we knew we would have some criticisms, just as we are getting criticisms that we're even thinking about eliminating any of them. But we wanted to be, in all of our research, it was repeated in nearly every community, don't rush this. Involve the public as thoroughly as you can, regardless of what they're saying they want and prefer. It's incumbent upon you to ensure that the public has a say in this process. And I would like to pride ourselves in the board on the amount of time that they did spend listening to the public.
Well, you did have a pretty large public hearing, I think, at the Armory a while back.
Right. Well, and
well attended.
I think prior to that we had the Oak Ridge Stables discussion, which I think you even attended those. So we've had other issues too to deal with besides just the deer. So.
Absolutely. Well, very good. You had mentioned a couple things that you wanted to be sure we got through during this session tonight. Are there other topics, things that we haven't asked about that you'd like to get out in front of the public? Gary, maybe you had some thoughts, or Ken. What else do we need to be thinking about when trying to form intelligent thoughts on the issues of overpopulation in the deer herds? I guess where does the meat go? I mean, if we had some ideas and thoughts about
all the meat that is harvested from the initial sharpshooters, the law enforcement sharpshooter harvest, will be processed and go to local food banks and harvesters to feed the hungry and the poor.
And how does that work? Are they butchered and frozen on site? Do they come actually out to the park?
We've talked to different food banks and different ones. Some have their own trailers, refrigerated trailers, and yes, they want as much meat as you can. You cannot sell game meat in the state of Kansas, and so it's critical that it goes to food banks that aren't charging for their meals or passing that meat on to their recipients free of charge.
And the butchers know to have them certified, the USDA standards, and
they have to be.
So no health concern issues there at all.
Yeah.
What can you get off a healthy, mature deer as far as weight?
40 to 45% of live dressed weight is what you'll get. So if you got a 100-pound doe that's field dressed, meaning, ready to butcher, you're going to get about 40 to 45 pounds of meat off of it.
And you're looking, on this first go-around, you're looking to get how many cleared out of the park?
That'll be determined by our effectiveness. So
Right.
it's difficult to answer that at this
Right.
time.
But if you were 100% effective, you're looking at 400 to 500 out of there.
Several hundred deer.
300.
So that's a
50 to
lot of
400
quarter
deer.
pounders, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Do you make the venison? Is
Yeah,
that
it's all, I think it's all ground
I think
up.
they grind it all
Is
up.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay?
Make burger out of it all.
Well, we're getting down to the end here. Gary, any thoughts rumbling around that we ought to clear up before we sign out?
You know, I think we looked at this issue carefully, and we've studied it, and we have reached a conclusion, and may not be something everyone agrees with, but I think we are moving ahead, and we are going to solve this issue, and hopefully in a very short period of time now. But
It doesn't appear as if this will land on the first one or two go-arounds, that there may be some monitoring needed to make sure that the numbers are where they need to be at. At the end of the day, well, what targets or goals, where do we need to be to make you comfortable that we've done the right thing?
I think let's look at that 50 figure, that we pointed out early on. That's what we're striving for. So, 50 per square miles. That seems to be a desirable goal.
You feel comfortable, Ken, the way they're handling this and what you've seen?
Well, they're doing the best they can with the public sentiment. The way it is. It has to be done. At least they're moving forward with it. I'd much more prefer to see the bow hunting in there, but it has to. They have to take a large number of deer off there immediately. So we use bow hunting to keep the numbers in check
for the bows, right?
But it will be evaluated after that.
Yeah. Are we going to see you out there going through the certification?
I'll be out there.
Very good. Gary, anything else you'd like to add?
That's all I had.
Mike?
Just that we ask all residents as they're watching this show and are listening in and on talk shows, reading it in the paper, that they educate themselves about all the issues. I said before, understand all the conditions as well as the restrictions. We talked about them. Wildlife and Parks does not allow relocation. They don't allow some of the contraceptives that have been talked about. Understand what we have done. And I think we have reached a very good and fair compromise with everybody's interests in mind, but the health of the deer first and foremost. And I know that's difficult for people to understand when you're eliminating so many of them. But the wildlife biologist toured the park last week, and with the wet summer we had, he even said we're not going to get probably what we would have expected, meaning the health of the deer being down because so much vegetation. He came back surprised in less than 1 hour that the ribs on the does were visible from the road, and they're 40, 50 yards off, and even the hip bones.
They're young right now too. So I mean,
they'll be evaluating the fat content on the harvested deer and looking for sicknesses or diseases amongst the deer to ensure the health of the deer for future generations.
Well, very good, gentlemen.
One of the things I'd like to say is that there's a lot of misinformation about deer running around after they've been struck by an arrow, surviving for hours and days. It's entirely false.
Not a reality.
Right. A good lethal shot on a deer with an arrow, the animal's expired in less than 10 seconds. The average shot for whitetail in North America is under 20 yards, and the average recovery is under 100. So they don't go more than 100 yards.
So if they're doing it right, the
if
animal
it's done
is dead
right,
quickly.
yeah, they're done. They're down in a hurry, and
Very
there's
good.
And we only want those that can do it right.
Exactly.
We appreciate
the
it.
only ones involved.
It's been very informative. I appreciate all of you taking
Thank
your
you.
time tonight. I want to thank you all for coming tonight and here to Let's Talk Issues for the Kansas City Star, as well as the Johnson County Community College and the League of Women Voters of Johnson County. I'd like to thank you for participating in Let's Talk Issues.